4 days. I stood in my grandmother's garden doing arithmetic I didn't want to finish, and the hum went on underneath the ordinary hum like a second heart beating slow inside a chest. I did not sleep well that night. I don't think I need to tell you that. I lay awake a long time listening to a house that was, as far as I could tell, entirely silent, and told myself the hum was just a hum, that hives do strange things in autumn, that I was a grown woman letting a coincidence of dates turn a perfectly nice stranger into something to be afraid of. I did not believe a single word of it. Somewhere around 3 in the morning I got up, went to my window, and looked out at the dark shape of my grandmother's oldest hive, and it looked exactly the way it always looked, which somehow made it worse. I went to the old record book instead of going to him, because I am a coward in exactly the way my grandmother raised me to be, careful before brave. The Marrow Hive book goes back 6 generations, kept in a chest in the room my grandmother calls the still room, though nothing has been distilled in it in my lifetime, every telling written down in a hand that gets worse and more slanted the further back you go, until the earliest pages are barely legible without holding them to the window. I was looking for the word death-telling, specifically, half hoping I wouldn't find it at all, and I found it exactly twice. The still room smells the way it always has, dried lavender and old paper, and the particular mustiness of a chest that's been shut more often than it's been opened, and I sat on the floor with my back against it the way I used to as a girl, when this room was where I went to hide from chores. It felt wrong to be looking for something frightening in a room that had only ever meant safety to me before. Once, 80 years back, in my great-great-grandmother's hand, the low hum came 3 days before word reached us that my brother had died at sea 6 months past, and none of us had known to tell the hive, so the hive told itself I read that 4 times before it landed properly. The hive hadn't warned them. It had waited for a death that already happened, one nobody here even knew about yet, and had simply started saying it out loud in the only language it had, because no one else had. I tried to imagine what that must have been like, to hear your own hive start humming a grief you didn't know you were carrying yet, and only understand it in hindsight, once the letter finally came. It made the hum feel less like a warning and more like a kind of terrible patience, the hive willing to wait months, years even, for someone to catch up to a truth it already knew. The second time was worse for being closer. My own mother's hand, the year before she died, about a stillbirth 2 farms over that no one in that family had had the heart to tell their own hives about, out of grief too raw to speak plainly. The hum started here, in ours, borrowed, until my mother rode over and told it properly on their behalf, standing at a stranger's hive and saying out loud what its own keepers couldn't. Then it stopped. My mother never mentioned it to me while she was alive. I only have it because she wrote it down. I sat with that a long time, twice in 80 years, and both times the hum wasn't looking forward at all. It was carrying something backward, a death already happened, untold, humming until someone finally said the truth of it out loud in the right place to the right hive in the right hour. Not a prophecy, a debt. I did not want to know what that meant for the last 4 days, and for the first time since Corwin arrived, I let myself actually think the question all the way through instead of flinching away from it. Whose death was this hive still owed the truth of? Reading my mother's hand in that book did something else to me too, something I hadn't expected. I don't have much of her in her own words. She died when I was 12. And most of what I know of her comes through my grandmother's telling of her, which is its own kind of translation. Here, in the margin of a Hive-Book entry about a stranger's grief, was a sentence in her actual hand, her actual voice, worrying over something the way I worry over things. I sat with that longer than I probably needed to, tracing the shape of her letters with one finger, before I made myself close the book and go back to the actual problem in front of me. I went and found Corwin instead, because I did not yet have the courage to ask the question straight, and because some part of me, the part my grandmother would call foolish and the part I'd call hopeful, wanted one more ordinary hour with him before I had to decide whether to be afraid of him. He was still working the hive rack, and he'd done good, patient work on it, better than Tam Fowler would have paid for, the kind of care you only put into something if you've decided, for whatever private reason, that it matters to get right. I sat across from him and held the wood steady while he pegged the joints, and for an hour we didn't talk about anything that mattered, and it was the easiest hour I'd had since the hum started. He hummed while he worked some tune I didn't recognize and stopped self-consciously when he caught me noticing, and I told him not to stop, and he started again, quieter, like he wasn't sure he believed me. "You're good at this," I said, meaning the joinery, and he said, without looking up, "I used to build things that were supposed to last. Feels strange doing it again." I asked, "What changed?" He went quiet in a way I was starting to recognize. Not offended, just closing a door very gently so I wouldn't hear it shut. "Long story," he said. "Boring, mostly." That was the second lie I'd caught him in, and I hadn't even asked him a real question yet. I almost asked him then where the boring long story actually started, what it was he used to build, whether used to meant he'd stopped by choice or by something else entirely, and I watched him watch me almost ask it, some old wariness surfacing in his face like he'd had this exact conversation start and stop before with someone else, somewhere else. I let it go, not because I wasn't curious, because some instinct I didn't fully trust yet told me that pushing would cost me more than waiting would. That evening I went back to my grandmother and told her what the book said, carried, not foretold. She nodded like she already knew, which stung more than I expected, given that she'd stood at that hive the night before looking as frightened as I'd ever seen her. "Then why won't you tell me what it means for him?" I said, and her face did something complicated, grief and caution both at once. "Because I don't know whose death it's carrying, girl." "Only that it isn't looking at his future. It's looking at somebody's past. Could be his. Could be a stranger's he's carrying without knowing it. The hive doesn't say whose grief it's finishing. Only that grief was left unsaid, somewhere, and it's found its way to us." "That's not an answer," I said, more sharply than I meant to, and she looked at me with something that might have been pride and might have been pity, hard to tell which on her. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." I've spent 60 years tending this hive, and I still don't have a better one than that to give you. I asked her then, the thing I hadn't quite let myself ask yet, whether she thought I should send him away before whatever this was finished arriving. She was quiet long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer that either. Outside, I could hear the ordinary evening sounds of Hallamere starting up. Someone's dog, a door, the mill wheel slowing for the night, and it struck me, sitting in my grandmother's kitchen with all of this pressing down on us, how strange it was that the rest of the village got to have an ordinary Tuesday while we sat here doing arithmetic with someone's unspoken grief. I don't think I'd ever before understood how much of what my family carries, we carry alone, by design, because telling anyone outside the bloodline what the hives actually do would cost us the one thing Peta hasn't managed to take from us yet, being believed, at least by each other. I asked her the only question left, has it ever been wrong? She was quiet long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. "It's never been wrong," she said. "It's only ever been early or late." And behind her, low under the ordinary hum, the second voice sang on, patient, unhurried, like it had all the time in the world to finish what it started. Episode 3, tomorrow.